Hello, everybody. It looks like we are live today. So welcome. I am Scott. I'm with Artist Network. This is Drawing Together. We have a nice big crew today. Today we are working on these apples. Working in graphite today. And this really kind of came about as a result of some conversations I've had with viewers, participants here in Drawing Together that have kind of encouraged me to reflect on my assumptions, the way I work with graphite really. So the relationship between graphite and charcoal. Actually, it looks like the audio is peaking here, so hold on just a second. So I chose to work in graphite today, and one of the things that I realized in doing this is that I've been saying throughout this whole series that, when I'm working in charcoal, that a lot of these principles can be applied to graphite as well. But I noticed in myself that when I would start working in graphite, I would kind of change the way I work. So the goal I set for myself in this drawing here was to utilize the graphite in the same way as I use charcoal. So really kind of think about them as being very similar mediums. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So in particular, it was a conversation that I had with Mike Henley. So today's podcast episode, there's a great new podcast called Drawing Inspirations that Mike puts together. So I'm the guest on that one that was released today. And in that, we're talking about this series together and the community that we really developed here. And we start talking quite a bit about the differences between charcoal and graphite. And so out of that conversation, it really kind of encouraged me to reflect on that. So if you're new, again, this is Drawing Together. We're here. It takes about an hour, hour and a half. We get together, we work on this drawing. If you have any questions, feel free to type them out in all caps, and I'm going to do my best to answer them. The reference image is in the description below the live event, and this goes up as a recording afterwards. So if you want to just watch and then do your drawing later, great. And then also, we have on Artist Network, we built out all these landing pages for each episode where I've been getting some really amazing drawings. You can all post your work there, post comments, see what everybody else is working on. So go to artistnetwork.com, check that out. Subscribe here and make sure you get the updates for when the next live session goes, because we go every Monday, Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern. So before I get too much farther along, I want to answer a few of the questions I saw. Adela, you had asked a question earlier about working with graphite on top of vine charcoal, and I would say give it a shot. In general, graphite and charcoal don't mix all that well, but what can sometimes happen though, like if you lay down a layer of graphite, it makes it hard for the charcoal to stick on top of that. Working the other way around may not be quite an issue, and vine charcoal is so soft that it might be all right. But what you might experience is that the hardness of the graphite could end up scraping away the vine charcoal. And what I'd like to demonstrate here is kind of applying the thinking of when I use vine charcoal, applying that thinking to graphite as well. The other question that we had here is about studio lighting. So the optimal setting for an indoor studio in general, if you can find a full spectrum light, something that simulates the balance of the temperature of sunlight, that's generally the best. I have one big photo light that I have up here, and then I have some just natural internal light, and that seems to work out all right for me. But generally, indoor studios require more light than just a standard room might. And then just kind of think about, generally at about a 45-degree angle to your surface typically works. And if you get two sources that bounce off of one another, it helps to eliminate shadows. So you can see here I've got some of a shadow that's being caused by this light up here. It's not causing too much of a disruption for me, but sometimes that shadow can be kind of a pain. So hopefully that helps. Let's see. Just checking for any other questions, but I think we want to get right into it. Anita 2780, is it okay to use a 2HB pencil? Absolutely. I'm so glad you asked that question, because that's one of the things I mentioned in the podcast, is that when it comes down to it, if I had any choice, if I were stuck with materials, I'd want just a regular yellow number 2 pencil, one of these guys right here. This says right here, it's an HB. So it's a really standard, very versatile tool. You don't have to have all of the full range of pencils, but it can be helpful. And so what I'd hate to have happen is somebody say, I can't do a drawing because I don't have the right pencil, right? If you just have a yellow number 2, you've got something that you can work with. What I have here is I have my ebony pencil and I have just a solid graphite pencil here. It's a woodless pencil, and that's what I'm going to be utilizing here. But I wanted to kind of show you how I kind of sharpen this. And my goal here today is just really to keep it simple. My pencils, my erasers, and that's it. No shading stump, no variety of pencils. I'm just going to use one pencil throughout this whole drawing. If you don't have a woodless pencil, if you have, this is an ebony pencil, but again, if you have the yellow number 2, like a 2HB or whatever, would be just fine. The way I sharpen it is with a razor blade, and I kind of use my thumb to kind of push forward and kind of scrape away some of that wood casing over there. And I try to be careful right when I get to that point of contact, because sometimes there can be kind of a layer of adhesive or something that bonds the wood to the graphite. And if I'm not careful, that can sometimes cause the core to break. Sometimes it's just broken in the middle. It's like in shipping or something like that, that core is already broken. And so no matter what you do, as you kind of shave away that wood, it's going to kind of break. But one of the things that I like to do is when I'm kind of pushing that forward, I try to go across the grain at a slight angle, and that helps me to control it a little bit. And so I just make a cut and I roll it, and these fingers are constantly rolling it, and I kind of work my way around, and then just keep cutting back to expose an inch or more of that core. And then as you're going to see me draw, that allows me to engage the side of the graphite a little bit more. So Valerie, you're asking if I have any experience working with a carbon pencil. I do, and I've done a few throughout the series. Is this it? I believe, yeah, this is a carbon pencil here that I've used. And I think it's okay. I'm having a hard time really wrapping my head around it. It does get darker, but it's also kind of a slightly different surface, and I'd like to experiment with it a little bit more. All right, let's see, what kind of blade and where do you get it? This is just a regular utility knife that I got from Home Depot. And this one, actually, I definitely need a new blade because it's getting a little dull. But that's typically all I need. And then once I've exposed this, then it's just a matter of taking some sandpaper and filing it down on its side. But so like I said earlier, though, I'm going to be using one pencil throughout this whole drawing. So I'm going to set aside the Prismacolor, and I've just got this woodless pencil. One of the things I noticed, though, it's got a kind of a plastic casing around it. So right up here on the edge, I've taken that razor blade and I've kind of scraped away some of that plastic kind of back from this edge a little bit more. In my preparatory drawing, I noticed that interfered with it a little bit. So I got to pull up my reference image, and I want to get started because I'm sure you're all anxious to get going. So this is the step I would normally be doing with vine charcoal if I was using charcoal. Using the side of my pencil, this is called the overhand grip. I'm essentially pinching it between my fingers like this. That helps engage the side of the pencil. Also holding it like this, kind of wedged between my fingers, helps to do that as well. I'm just going to use this overhand grip, and I'm just going to start kind of blocking in the masses of value. And if you're kind of not used to working with the material this way, kind of get a feel for it by rocking it back and forth. You're going to, as you kind of rotate your hand, you're going to get a sense for when you're making kind of full contact with the side of the pencil. Now, one of the advantages to utilizing the side of a graphite pencil is that it encourages the graphite to kind of float on the surface of the paper. If I switch to this tripod grip and I'm engaging the tip with the pencil, it's going to embed a line. This is a harder material than charcoal, so it's going to leave an embossed line on the page that's going to show up with multiple layers. And that's it. I kind of have come to accept that that's going to be a part of the drawing process, but I'm going to try to minimize that as much as possible. So what I'm doing right now is I'm trying to think about the positive and negative space in this drawing. I've got the image projected up here off to my left, and I've got this camera overhead. I can see in the screen in front of me what I'm drawing, and it's more vertical this way, so I get a better kind of understanding of my proportions. And I'm just kind of building up this layer, and I'm really utilizing only the weight of the paper. And as I'm going across, you can see I'm kind of working back and forth across this page. I'm looking for light spots, and where it's light, I might apply just the slightest amount of pressure to fill in that area in hopes that it'll lead to a more kind of even and consistent tone across the page. So looking at that negative space, and kind of drawing the shape of that dark around the backside of the apples. And one of the things I liked about this reference photo is that alternating sequence of light and dark, where we have a dark background, light apple that transitions into shadow on this side, and then we hit light again on this apple, transitioning into shadow here, and then we have that light fabric underneath it that that also provides another opportunity for kind of value variation. As I'm doing this, I'm also thinking about rotating the direction of my marks. You know, I'm kind of moving my arm, not moving my wrist as much, but moving my arm to get a different angle to create some essentially cross-hatching back in here. So again, the way I'm working now is similar to how I'd be working with the charcoal. So this is all about trying to apply the thinking from charcoal to graphite, because I think graphite lends itself to the process of creating an outline and then filling it in. It really kind of encourages the use of the point, the tip of the graphite more than anything, and I want to see if I can break that here and kind of hopefully challenge your way of thinking about graphite as well if you happen to get locked into that. As I'm doing this, I'm also rotating this pencil. So I'm rolling my fingers gradually as I move across, and that helps to keep keep this form more symmetrical. I don't get these flat edges on there. Mark V mentioning a Mark Crilly book. Yeah, that's a good source there. One of the things I'm also trying to think of is pressure as I'm doing this. Again, I'm mostly utilizing the weight of the pencil to do this. When you're creating your hatch marks here, consider where your pressure is within the context of each stroke. So if I slow this down and I move my graphite across, I'm trying to put the pressure on the center of that path rather than the ends. There's a tendency to want to kind of lean into a mark and then back into a mark and kind of like this, and that leaves these hard edges at the end of each stroke. But if I put my weight kind of in the middle of that stroke, it eliminates those. And so it's almost like this rocking motion. So thinking about pressure in the context of your marks can be really kind of helpful. And so if you've been with the series for a while, you see me do this quite a bit, using the side or the palm of my hand to kind of smooth things out. And for somebody working in graphite, this may make you cringe because again, graphite kind of encourages kind of precision and cleanliness. And there's typically a desire to work in an area and then preserve that. Don't mess it up again. We're going to be messing it up as part of the process because I'm trying to build up a unification of values. I want everything to feel like it's part of the same value structure in the light source. And so I'm thinking about these larger masses of value as I go along, thinking about the structure of light and shadow. And if I can unify everything through light and shadow, it's going to help. All right, so I'm just kind of checking some basic proportions, doing an eyeball kind of assessment of that. And so you might notice down in here where we have that fabric, I'm not being very precious at all with any of these edges. This is where I'm going to have to trust the paper and trust the eraser that I can actually cut back into some of these areas. So I'm doing a lot of squinting to try to see the basic value structure. Nia, you're asking about the shading stump and graphite. It certainly does. And I made the calculated choice to eliminate it for this drawing because I'm trying to go for simplicity. Just see, if I have one pencil, my kneaded eraser, and my hard rubber eraser, what can I do with that? So now at this pass, I'm starting to refine the form of the apples. You can see them starting to form here. As I look at the curves in the apple, I'm going to try to break it down into a sequence of short, straight marks. So try to find sections along the curve that I can interpret as kind of a straight angle and then replicate that on the page. So as I'm looking at the reference image, I'm putting my awareness on this hand. I can still see the movement of this hand out of my peripheral vision, and I'm trying to get that movement to align with the angles that I'm seeing in the reference photo. And so when I'm looking at the paper, I'm doing a quick check-in to see, am I in the right spot? Because I don't want to be making marks, in aligning my the marks that I'm on the page with a part of the apple, and I'm in the wrong spot on the page, if that makes sense. So really all I'm doing is just making sure that I'm in generally the right spot. So much of drawing is about making quick decisions and then moving on. We want to build our drawing in the same way that our observations are forming. So taking kind of quick assessments, but making them fairly general. I don't want to get bogged down in details at this point. I want there to be form and structure. So now I'm just kind of working through the drawing. I'm trying not to get stuck in any one area. And if I squint my eyes, I can see the light and shadow structure of the apples a little bit more clearly. So building up the values and just wiping it down again. And I'm looking to see also if there's any strong directionality to the marks, because I want to make sure that the direction of my marks serve the form of the objects. So in this apple, for example, you can see the variations in color that are generally running vertically along that apple, and they follow a kind of a curve that helps to reinforce our understanding of the form of that apple. And so I'm not thinking about replicating the texture specifically, but if I'm going to be placing values, I might as well be having those marks support that texture, the direction of that texture. And if I make these marks this way, if they become too strong, then I have to overcome that later. I may have to adjust those marks. So hopefully that makes sense. And it does help me at this stage to think kind of gesturally about the forms and the textures, and just to increase my overall understanding of that form. So I'm making a mental note that there's a highlight right in here. There's a shift in value up around the edges. And then we really fall into shadow down in this area. So I'm just shifting my grip here a little bit because it was so horizontal in that overhand grip. I need to be able to kind of rotate up a little bit to get that point of the pencil going when I need it. But pressure, I feel like pressure becomes perhaps a bigger player when working with graphite than perhaps charcoal, because of the inherent hardness of the graphite. It's going to again, like I said earlier, it's going to emboss on the page a bit more readily than the charcoal will. And so if I want to be kind of just sensitive to that surface. And one of the things that we talk a lot about in this series is the idea of building up the drawing as a whole. You build up the whole thing kind of at once, and I want to apply that thinking here to graphite. So if you are, if you're more experienced working with graphite than charcoal, and your process is to typically create an outline and then fill it in, I'm encouraging you to kind of challenge that. Not to say that that way is wrong, but this just could be an opportunity to learn the material in a new way that you can then apply back to your standard way of working. So ultimately, you want to find what works for you, but sometimes, kind of changing up your process can be a way to help you kind of refine your natural process. So there's really these nice dark values in here that one of the things I'm also thinking about as I go through this is recognizing that there's a limit to the depth of value that I can create. I can't get as dark as the dark that's on the in the reference photo, so I'm not worried about replicating that so much. So as I'm placing that center stem, there's several things that I'm looking for. I've got that basic form established, and I'm feeling pretty good about it, but I still need to question that. In that initial attempt that I had done, I kept drawing this apple way too big, and then I really had to cut it down. And so I have that experience in my mind that I'm referring to, but it's important for me to remind myself that this is all an evolution on the page. So as I'm placing this, I'm looking at the information that I have here, but I'm also aware of the fact that that all could change. So I'm looking for other key points to make sure I've placed this properly. And one of the key points is as this stem starts to become visible here, I'm getting a sense for where this stem is in this apple, which is generally centered in it. I can kind of create a triangle or an angle down to the stem on this apple, and I want to make sure that that generally works. And then I'm also thinking about the distance from this dark spot to the top and down to the bottom, and then off to the right and to the left. So how much is left, how much is to the right, and I'm taking these kind of mental observations in and making some adjustments. There's this shadow I want to get established early on. So again, we're thinking about building up the drawing as a whole. And as I work with the graphite on its side, I still have a fairly sharp point here. So when I get to that point of detail, I will be able to kind of engage that finer detail, that sharper point. And so that thinking that I had going on here in terms of placing the center and that stem of this apple here, I'm doing that throughout the whole drawing. So before I make a mark, and if I'm working here in this shadow that forms underneath the apple, I want to do a quick check-in to see where I'm at relative to other aspects of the drawing. So much of drawing is that. It's the idea that you're working on one area while your awareness is on another. And sometimes you get to a place you're working on an area and you realize that you need to resolve another area first before you can actually add any sort of detail or refine another portion. I want to be careful. My marks are getting more noticeable on this section of the apple, and I want to be thinking about the texture, because if I'm going to have marks show, I might as well have them be in service of the texture. Kind of follow the grain of the apple. I just noticed one of the things that had kind of escaped my mind there is I forgot to rotate the pencil as I was going through, so I started to get a flat spot. And when I do that, then the opportunity for kind of ridges appears. So I need to make sure that I continually rotate my pencil. So building it up, wiping it down, you can see there's an atmosphere forming here. And it kind of shows what I was talking about earlier about the idea that of carrying that mindset of always having there's something, the drawing to be recognizable at this point. You should be able to stop at any moment and say, I know what that is. And then the drawing process is really about pulling that out to the degree which you're comfortable. So if you like there to be more detail, you continue to work. If you like the softness of this, maybe like I could say right now, I really like the atmosphere of it and I want to stop, right? I could do that and somebody could look at this and say, I know what that drawing is. And it could be complete. And that's where I think there's strength in this mindset for working, because it puts you kind of in control of the rendering of it a bit more. If I had started with an outline, I was finishing one area and then moving to the next, I would need to know in advance exactly how detailed I need to be in each area, and bring up that area to that degree before moving on. And in this case, because I'm building it up all at once, I can kind of be surprised by that process. And maybe, as I come up to one area, you realize, all right, I brought it up as far as I need to go, and I want to, or maybe not far enough, and kind of go from there. Ania is asking, when would you use cross-hatching versus circular or linear strokes? So in this case, I'm kind of doing all of it at once. Part of it depends on how you're utilizing the marks. And so if you are utilizing the kind of point, if you're building it up with a series of thin lines, then you would want to use cross-hatching a bit more. In this case, the direction of the marks are going to play a role in simulating the texture and the form. And so I'm kind of making that assessment as I go along. So you can see that I'm using these marks here that's generally a hatching following the form of the apple. And that's going to be helpful in creating that texture. So when I get to that background, perhaps I switch to a more circular mark where the direction of those marks becomes less evident. And then that contrast between something that's smoother in the background, more linear in the foreground, will help to create some spatial differentiation there. And so it is kind of something that I like to evaluate as I go, and I can see what's actually playing out on the page, and ask yourself, are those marks really helping to create the form in the space, or are they impeding it? And then changing the marks up accordingly. So moving to a more circular mark to soften things up, and moving it to a more linear, more cross-hatching kind of approach to reinforce the form through the use of kind of cross-contour marks. So hopefully that makes sense. So again, kind of squinting as I go. Now you may be thinking down in this area, I've got that white fabric. I'm going to show you what I'm going to keep working on the apple, but I'm going to come back into that area in a little bit. I'm going to show you what I'm thinking along there pretty soon, because there is this transition where we have the dark background against the light apple, and then we come down here where it's a darker part of the apple against that lighter that lighter background there. Getting an understanding of the kind of the push and the pull of the materials can be helpful as well. So as I'm making these marks here, I'm kind of bringing those marks up and kind of lifting them off as I go. And as I come up here, maybe it's the opposite, kind of bringing them down and lifting up into that center a little bit more. So I'm sneaking up on the values here. I'm not trying to hit those values correctly at this stage. I'm building them all up together. So smoothing things out a little bit. And this is where, when you build up these layers of value, I love the silvery quality that graphite can kind of lend itself to. All right, so I think I've got the basic values kind of blocked in. Now I can see some of these darker marks in here. Looks like a little flaw in the paper. That's all right. All right, what do I want to do now? Let's see. I think what I want to do is I want to start to refine those forms. I'm feeling good about the overall masses. If I'm looking at the drawing, it feels like I'm looking at it out of focus under frosted glass, but the proportions are all kind of making sense. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into this background, kind of working up to find that edge. But I really want to be careful about creating a halo here, and that's it. It's really easy to do that with graphite. So I want to be really careful. And maybe what I'll need to do with my eraser is I want to find that light here. So this is my rubber eraser. So I'm just kind of pushing and pulling to try to find that form. I'm going to come across here to try to find this one as well. So I'm doing some negative drawing here. So you can see how I didn't draw that line to find that edge of the that fabric. I'm just kind of pushing up to it. And I'm also trying to hold in my mind the placement of, you know, in that apple, that edge of the apple right there. And I can do the same here. Let's see, we've got this fold here that comes in on top. And this eraser kind of slips across the surface a little bit. It's picking up the graphite, and then at some point the graphite on the eraser just kind of slips on the graphite that's on the paper and doesn't really do much. But if you kind of bear down a little bit more on the eraser, it should pick off, you know, and kind of work back down to the white of the paper a little bit more. And remember that no matter what tool you have, it's an opportunity to refine and contribute to the form of the object. And so an eraser isn't just about correcting mistakes, it's an opportunity to refine that form. So I'm kind of thinking about that positive and negative spatial relationship between the fabric and the apple. And in that way, similar to how I've been working with charcoal in other parts, in other episodes in the series, I can create that form without using a line first. And when you see that when you do that, your brain interprets that as a mass rather than a line, and that can impact how we interpret the form. All right, so that helped to kind of just establish those forms back to this background. So as this kind of illustrates what I was talking about earlier, you know, my goal is to work on this background. And I realized that, and I needed to establish this part of the fabric before I could do that. And then in doing that fabric, it helped to establish these parts of the fabric. Also, I can come back and do this part of that background. So it shows you how it's all a network. Everything is kind of intertwined here. Pranya asking, why did I choose graphite? So I kind of explained it towards the beginning, so if you're coming in a little bit late, I chose graphite for this precisely as a result of conversations I've had with viewers in the series that have kind of caused me to reflect on how I use graphite. And that, you know, throughout this series, I have been using charcoal more than graphite, and making the statement that everything I'm illustrating in the charcoal can be applied to graphite as well. But I thought it might be helpful to demonstrate how that actually might play out. So I'm trying to draw with the graphite in the same manner with which I would draw with the charcoal, if that makes sense. So the idea of building up the drawing as a whole, thinking about it in terms of light and shadow structure, and utilizing kind of the side of the material in these broad areas to fill in masses of value. So as I come up to this edge, I want to be mindful of any sort of outline that I make. This is where I see kind of an opportunity to really refine the drawing for a lot of beginning students is right up along that edge. And try to be sensitive to the idea of any sort of kind of halo around that edge where because when we start to tighten up our marks, it can lead to kind of blotchiness that may be fine in other parts of the drawing, but right up along the edge, it can kind of help degrade the form. The edges are really important in any work of artwork, any work of art in any medium. So as I'm doing this, I'm pushing down a little bit harder so that I'm engaging the side of the graphite a bit more. As I come up to the edge, I'm rotating up to engage the tip, and that gives me a little bit more control as I work out. And it's working kind of back and forth, coming in and out up to that edge to help remove any sort of halo there. And if you see that these marks are kind of building up, try shifting the direction of your marks. If you're creating straight kind of hatch marks, maybe they become circular in motion. So it's kind of coming up to the edge, finding where that is, and then feathering it out. And so I'm gradually getting darker, but I'll probably make another pass of this another time as well. And now I need to be mindful of the edges of the apple as well. So the angle of the edges I need to be careful with, so that I don't want to have the background marks parallel the curve of the apple, because that's going to flatten things out. This is an opportunity for those background marks to run in a different direction than the curve of the apple. And that helps to reinforce the spatial relationship. So hopefully this is all making sense. Have I tried any other styles other than realism drawing? Absolutely. So when I was in graduate school, the work that I was doing was very large, more abstract. I was dealing with symbolic images. And I've definitely tried my hand at more abstract, painting. But I just keep coming back to observational work. I prefer to draw from life as much as possible. I think for the sake of the series, being able to work from a reference photo is really helpful. And so I'm using the reference photo here because it's hard to replicate working from life in this format here. So as I get up, watch. So you saw me earlier create this edge using the eraser. I know I can do that again. So instead of drawing that line here, what I'm going to do is going to carry those marks right over that edge, and I can actually do that on the apple as well. I can carry right over that edge and then use my eraser to cut that back out again. And in doing that, I create that nice clean overlap. And if I do that here on the apple as well, if I need to refine that form, I can come back in with my eraser and kind of clean up that edge. Now you can see that so my eraser is picking up graphite, so it's actually drawing now is what it's doing. It's actually making a mark. You want to be careful about those edges, and I'm trying to get rid of any outlines as much as possible. This is kind of a distraction along this edge, so I'm just going to try to clean that up. Let's see. Dahlia, I am using a 4B pencil for this one, but I think a number 2 pencil would actually work just fine for this as well. So if all you have is like a regular yellow number 2 pencil, go for it. All right, so now again, we're kind of refining those edges, and I want these edges to have some variety to them. Some areas where it's a little bit sharper, some areas where it's a little bit more diffused, and that's going to help to reinforce the sense of volume on the apple. So hopefully this is kind of connecting with you all. If you're following along, I'd love to hear how this is going for you. All right, so what I'm going to do, let's see, I'm just kind of thinking through this form along here, and I think what I need to do is do some negative drawing in here just to establish that edge, but I want to be careful not to outline it. So as I'm working on this edge, I'm mostly thinking about actually drawing the apple behind it as a way to get at the form of the apple in front. I think you have to deal with the part of the apple so that with the base of this drawing, then with the back. Yeah, we're kind of floating throughout the whole drawing. So I'm trying to bring up everything as a whole. Again, this is the same kind of process that I would be utilizing in charcoal. Just kind of giving some indication of this form here. I don't know quite what I'm going to do down here. I think in my preparatory drawing I had it cropped a little bit differently. I had more of that top showing, so we may end up just kind of cropping this drawing over here. So see what happens if I just get rid of this. One of the things I have to be mindful as well is that you've seen me kind of build up and wipe down these areas of graphite. You can see how dirty my hand is right now. And again, that's how I would be using charcoal. But I have to remind myself that my eyes are calibrating to the values here. So it's interpreting the darks as black, it's interpreting the lightest light as white, but it may not actually be the case. So if I were to kind of erase out this line here, I can get to a little bit brighter white. All right. Now this edge along in here is a little bit soft. And I'm going to come back around to this a little bit more later. Let me just kind of block in this. The general idea though in building up your whole drawing at once is that, you know, I feel like I've already drawn this apple multiple times. You know, I haven't done any sort of rendering, but I keep coming back around to that. And each time I do, I'm making additional observations about it rather than making one thorough kind of in-depth observation about the object. I'm making lots of little ones that all accumulate together to create my understanding of the form. All right, so I think with everything kind of established now, I feel pretty confident that I can kind of start to refine this a bit more. Now I can start to get to a level of finish with this apple here. Now, as you notice, I didn't draw that stem in there. And I did that on purpose because I wanted to be careful. I didn't want my background marks to feel broken up. You know, so if I had drawn that stem and then tried to do the background around it, I run the risk of kind of both sides of that background not quite lining up. I wanted there to be kind of unity in that background. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to place that stem here. I'm going to place that base, kind of work my way up, find the general path to it, ask myself how precise do I need it to be. In this case, you know, I need to make sure I'm kind of generally in the ballpark, but it doesn't have to be exactly the same. Now I'm going to use the edge of my rubber eraser. I'm going to try to find an edge that's a little bit cleaner. And I'm just going to kind of erase out that line. So just a series of short kind of vibratory marks there to create that stem. And then come back in and kind of refine that, add some texture if I need to. And I just want to be careful around that edge. But you can see by doing it that way, that background still stays unified and that stem pops forward a bit more. Again, if I had drawn that first and then filled in that background, there's a chance that that background would be broken, which will pop that to the surface, and we would kind of lose those spatial relationships between the stem and that background. All right, Barb, you're saying it seems to work about better for you with the kneaded eraser. That's good to hear. Yeah, I think in my preparatory one, I was using the kneaded eraser quite a bit more than I am now. All right, so now I'm starting to apply some of that texture. So one of the things that we talked about in some of the other episodes when we're managing detail is to think about the region you're in, and then try to replicate the type of mark you're seeing in that area, so that I don't get bogged down trying to match exactly one for one the reference photo and the drawing. In order for the texture to feel natural, what is important is to understand the general flow and the general value, but also to kind of trust the materials a little bit. So if I look in this region of the apple, I take my observations here. In general, what I'm trying to do is understand how heavy those marks would be and what direction they run in, rather than kind of being consumed with the idea that it has to be precisely, kind of identical to the reference photo. So I need to get a little bit darker in here to define this edge. Just going to feather that out a little bit. As I'm also creating that texture, I'm thinking about the form of the apple. So as I come up to the edge, I'm trying to lighten that up, kind of just let it kind of wrap up and around. And now with this being a dark background, I don't have to be super concerned. I can run these marks right over into that background. It's not going to do anything. They're not going to show up. So I don't have to be very precise with how I control my marks down at this end here. I can let them run right into that background. So utilizing the side of the pencil, I'm kind of rolling it in my fingers, and the texture of the paper can start to play a role in this as well. So letting that tooth of the paper show through actually helps to simulate the texture of the apple. And there's all these little spots here, and you can decide for yourself how precise you need to be. Do you want to get all of those little spots? I don't, because that just makes me feel claustrophobic, a little antsy to try to get every little detail. But some of you might like that. You might really enjoy getting kind of pulled into those details. All right, so again, in my commitment to not get bogged down in one area over another, I'm going to keep moving around this apple. And I don't have to be super precise with this one here, because I can always use my eraser to refine that form and kind of cut back in on top of it. So I'm going to keep looking at the angle of the marks. What can I do to reinforce that form? And you can see, like, again, this hand is just covered in graphite, and it's smudging this up like crazy. And that's all right. I knew that was going to happen, and I'm just going to let it go for now, because I can go back through and clean it up. Eileen is asking what paper I'm using. This is a Hahnemuehle Skiza. This is the 120 weight. It's a difficult paper to find here in the US, but if you go to their website, you might be able to find out where you can order it from. They have a store locator, and I know they sell some on Blick. but I don't know if they sell that particular brand, that particular line. I know they sell some Hahnemuehle paper. So this is generally a smooth drawing paper. And I find that it works really well to release the material. A lot of paper will accept the material, graphite or charcoal, but it's tricky to find ones that will release it when you erase. So now I'm moving over to this side. I'm kind of working my way in to find the form. And there's a little bit of bounce light under here that I'm going to show you how I'm going to create. I'm going to build up a general value here. I got to remind myself to keep rotating the pencil. So as I look for that shape of the bounce light, what I'm going to do is identify where that is and then slightly darken the area around it. I find myself being precious with that edge, and I just reminded myself I don't have to do that. I can use my eraser to pull that back out. Sharpen up this edge a little bit. And if you're just kind of joining us now with Artists Network, this does go up as a recording, so you can kind of catch where the early stages of this drawing. But the goal here, again, is to simulate charcoal to some degree, to utilize the graphite in the way that I would be using charcoal, to apply the same principles there. Because I found myself making assumptions, making statements about how graphite should be used or how it can be used, and realizing that I need to check those assumptions. So just, again, with kind of simulating the texture, just by following the grain of that texture, I can start to simulate the texture of the apple, those variations in color. And this is all just utilizing the side of the pencil. It's darker in here, and then if I need to, again, I can clean this up. Before I move on, I'm going to try to indicate the pattern here on the fabric. So I'm going to utilize the side of the pencil. Rather than outlining it, again, I'm going to utilize that side, and I need to make some observations, and before I make the mark, I need to visualize what I'm going to do first. Where is that mark going to go? Am I in the right spot? And try to essentially just kind of practice it before I commit to it. And then I want to try to get it in as few marks as possible. And in this case, I'm not even going to try to understand what that pattern actually is. We're kind of shearing across it. I'm just going to be looking for the shapes of light and dark and try to get those in the right spot. So in this way, I'm trying to think about it as a solid shape rather than, again, filling it in, thinking about it as a line that we're then filling in. Now, let's see. There's some variation in there. I want to look for the brightest brights, the brightest lights. I'm going to erase those out. So there's one right along in here. Kind of get that fold in there. So hopefully that makes sense. Do some negative drawing in here. I'm going to work up to find the edge of this white fabric there, or whatever that is. What's nice about some of these dark areas, I'm utilizing the side of the pencil, and that's kind of filing down to find that nice sharp point of the pencil a bit more. So then I have that sharp edge when I need it. All right. Adding a little bit of form here. All right, how's everybody doing? Let's see, what's the, hey there, Mike. Pencil hardness, this is a 4B. This is, it's a woodless pencil. Oh, it's a General's woodless pencil. This is 97 4B, so it's just a solid graphite. And again, it has a kind of a plastic casing around it that I use my razor blade to shave off just around this edge, so that when I'm utilizing on its side, what was happening in the preparatory drawing is I didn't do that. And so that edge of the plastic would kind of catch and scratch the paper, and it was relieving these kind of embossed edges that the graphite then would fill. Not that big of a deal. It was actually kind of a cool texture, but I didn't want to use that for this drawing. All right. Todd asking, how long are we at? We're almost an hour on this one, so, but we're getting there. And now I haven't erased the highlights. I'm going to come back in and get those highlights a little bit more. I'm going to move over to this apple here. Ooh, I just popped into my head. I never really finished that thought about the reflected light here, the bounce light. So I'm going to establish that a little bit. So it's important, if you're kind of following the same process, keep that pencil rotating as you go. So because it starts to flatten out. When it flattens out, then the edges of that flat spot become harder, and it can sometimes kind of catch on the paper and leave a line that maybe is less desirable. All right, so some negative drawing in here as I want to create this edge of the apple. And as I said earlier, when I was drawing this background apple, I wasn't being very precious with this edge, because I can always clean that up if I need to using my eraser. Now this is a pretty sharp edge right here. I want to feather this out a little bit. But then if I go like that, just kind of smudge that out, it leaves that sharper edge without it being too bright. Clean up some of those dark spots. Yeah, that Kneaded eraser, there it is. I kind of forgot that I had that in my hand. I got kind of locked into the rubber eraser. Oh, Todd, in my life, how long have I been drawing? That's a good question. Let's see, it was 24 years ago that I started art school in Baltimore. And that's when I really started drawing intentionally, you know, I had kind of made that commitment. But, you know, really, I mean, I had been drawing my whole life up to that point. You know, my earliest memories when I was younger, my room was lucky enough to have a giant chalkboard on it, the whole wall was a chalkboard, and I would just sit in there and draw on that a lot. But I didn't really start making a commitment, let's see, until, you know, I was probably in middle school where I really started to define myself as an artist and really spend more time with it, which is pretty typical. That as you know, when I studied the arts and human development, it's typically around middle school that all of a sudden drawing becomes about making it look right, whereas leading up to that point, generally it was, you know, more about kind of a personal expression and exploring materials. So something happens when at middle school, and all of a sudden you want to make it look right. And if it doesn't work out, we typically tell ourselves, well, guess that just means I'm not an artist. Or if it does work out, then you say, well, I am an artist. So we haven't developed the mental kind of skill of rationalizing the fact that we just haven't practiced, right? And so we think for some reason at that age that art is an inherent skill that you're born with or you're not, and we haven't learned that it's really just a set of skills that you can learn and apply, and anybody can kind of develop. But that's when I kind of committed kind of personally to art making, was in middle school, but I didn't really start seriously doing it until about 24 years ago. And one of the reasons, I kind of to belabor the point, I guess, a little bit, but one of the reasons we're doing this whole series, it came about because I had neglected my own drawing practice a little bit. I'm a painter, and so I had realized that I had neglected my drawing practice significantly, and so this was an opportunity for me to develop my drawing. I hadn't drawn really for quite a while, outside of any drawing that might take place in a painting, or doing a study of say graphic design or something. But I'm finding that this has been tremendously helpful to my painting in terms of how quickly I kind of get to accurate proportions and perspective when I'm painting. And so my objective is it's playing out. It's working as I had hoped it would. Is that all of this gets transferred to other media. All right. So again, I'm kind of building up the values, but I'm trying not to be too persnickety with the texture. We see the color variation right around here on that stem, and I want to kind of get it close, but I don't want to be bogged down and trying to get it 100% accurately. Jane asking if you're kind of starting in your 60s and you want to get back into it. I guess there's a lot. There's a lot that I can suggest. Drawing, I think, is really important. Patience with yourself is really important. And one of the things that it's something that I mentioned a lot early on in this series, but I've kind of fallen off, is that one of the things I like about this series is that we can just be doing this for ourselves. One of the things that I think can be somewhat destructive in our culture is that when we see somebody making a work of art, or when they've done a drawing or something, they've created a drawing. For some reason, there's a tendency to identify that as then being an artist, right? And all the cultural associations with that, the idea that, we have terms like a starving artist, right? Or we have the idea of somebody like a Van Gogh that, never sold anything in his life, but anybody who bought them or, like invested in them, they would have, they're worth millions and millions of dollars now. And we don't typically create an internal model of somebody who just makes art. Drawing is just something that we as humans do. When you get to the point where you want to make a career out of it, then a different set of criteria might come into play as you're evaluating your work. But until then, it can just be that. It can just be drawing. And so I think one of the challenges that I sometimes work with students on is to, just forget any sort of kind of future projection that you might be making. Well, do I need to develop a style, or what's the what's going to sell? Sometimes that question kind of happens so early, and I would say just do it because you love it. and find what you connect with in your art. And that's really important, because once you become a master of that, that's where style emerges, and that's where everything kind of gets built out from there. I think Alex Katz, I read a quote by him that basically said, you know, find the way that you utilize the materials, and then you become the master of that. And he certainly did that with his, you know, large, more kind of abstract kind of symbolism paintings. Like I still don't understand how he moved that paint around to the way he did. And so really just kind of, you know, try to connect with the process of it as much as possible. And try to shut down that critical voice that says, well, I should be doing this or I should be doing that. Right here, I needed to define that backside of the apple. I was kind of losing it. There's some nice reflected light. You can see that light striking here bounces off the apple in an interesting way. Ooh. And as you might have just seen there, that eraser was ultimately just moving the charcoal around on the paper. So I just had to bear down a little bit more to pull that graphite up. So right now, I know I'm not really following the contour of the apple, so I'm intentionally using circular marks to build up a value here. Nia, you're asking about color shifts or value shifts in a color photograph. It is really tricky, especially when you're dealing with bright things like a bright yellow. You know, having a value finder, viewfinder can be helpful. So what you might even do is just take a hole punch on a white piece of paper and put it on top of your photo reference, and that can sometimes help. That's a helpful tool for evaluating color as well, by isolating it from everything else. Because one of the things that we talked about, and it's been a while since we really have explored that idea, is that values are relative. So the values that we're seeing are all in the context of the values that are around it. And our brains calibrate to the value relationship and the value range in the work, and it does that with color as well. And so try to isolate that as much as possible, the area that you're working on, and that might give you a little bit more information about the value of it. Squinting is really helpful in helping to evaluate value relationships, because it prioritizes value. All right, so now as I work down in here, we have the relationship between the fabric and the apple, and it's really difficult to see, you know, in this area where the apple ends and that shadow that's cast on the fabric begins. So one of the things you want to be mindful of is that this dark area here is fabric that's in shadow. So be careful with the direction of your marks. You want it to, we don't want that shape to pop off the page. Okay, there's some kind of quick suggestions of the form here. I'm not going to add a whole lot of detail to this area because I don't want this to detract from that. A lot of what's happening here is I'm rotating my hand. This pencil is a little bit short. I would normally have this kind of wedge between my fingers, but I can't really do that. So I'm trying to rock that hand a little bit. So as I roll up, it kind of shortens that mark. As I lay it down, it widens it. And I'm thinking more like a paintbrush at this point. All right, where are we at? Now I got to get back to this apple. I think what I need to do is kind of lay on this a little bit more. I need to build up these values in here to help create some variation across there. And then at the same time, while I'm working on this area, I'm trying to resolve value relationships here, because we have a transition from that red to the yellow, but then we also have a kind of a highlight here. And in that yellow spot, we have some areas that are in shadow and others that are in light. And so this, that question earlier about interpreting color as value, this is where I need to really be sensitive to that and take some time to manage that. So what I want to do is kind of squint. And if I do, I realize that those yellow areas in here pretty much disappear. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time kind of refining those values. As I come down under here, then it gets light, and that value here seems relatively close to the highlight up in this area. As I work across there, one of the things that you can start to do is suggest some of those circles and the forms that are on there. There's one I get up in this area. Utilizing the side of the pencil, I'm just kind of suggesting them. If you're trying to add the texture, you want to be careful about using the point, the tip of the pencil, because if you outline it, that's an indication in the mind that it's a separate shape and it's going to pop off that surface. So try to suggest it as perhaps a light and shadow form. Again, utilizing the side of the pencil. So just a little bit of texture that gets suggested there. Mike, you're asking, what part are you watching as you were drawing? Yeah, I think we talked about that the other day. What areas distract you that you need to get back to? I think that's a good question, because I think I need to pay attention to that, because it's hard to identify what the trigger is that's pulling my mind to another area, because it tends to happen very naturally, and I think it's come out of the practice of drawing over time. And so, for example, as I'm darkening this, I'm kind of being aware of that value shift across here and seeing if anything kind of jumps out. Because what can happen sometimes is, like, I'll look at this area and I'll make a mental declaration, say I'm going to darken this spot here. And it takes a few seconds to actually make that happen. So while I'm making that happen, then my mind is on the next step. I'm like, where am I going to next? And that becomes, that's the difficult spot to kind of latch onto. What forces me or encourages me to move on to the next step. Often, it's contrast that's going to pull out. Our minds are designed to respond to contrast, to change from one thing to another. Motion is a form of contrast, the difference between something that's moving versus still, and that's highly visible. Value contrast in shape. And so if I'm working in this area and all of a sudden my awareness shifts to other parts of the drawing, it's something that's high contrast that seems jarring that's going to draw my attention. And if it doesn't, then I'll work over here. So I think what's drawing my mind over here is that this feels incomplete. I need to add that stem in a bit. So I'm kind of working my way into it. All right, so I have this shadow of the stem established. And now what I want to do is kind of indicate where that bottom edge of the stem is going to be, creating that shadow here. So just like I did up here, I'm going to be using my eraser to pull that out. As I'm making that, as I need to determine how long that is, so what I did is I used this as a point of reference. I'm looking at the reference photo, and the ends are generally in line with one another. I'm looking at where it's dividing the apple. I feel like this is a little bit low, but it's close enough. Now I'm going to use my rubber eraser. And so you can see it's not really doing a whole lot. It's just kind of moving the graphite around at this point. So I'm going to bear down a little bit more. And that erased up too much of it. So I can come back in and kind of refine that a little bit more. And I can add some texture. I think that end of that stem is really fascinating. I didn't quite get the shape right of the stem, but I think that's all right. It reads as a stem. Also, I'm trying to think about it. I want to make sure that it's not a consistent, even line. It's not what I see in the photo, and it also, you know, if I make it a consistent line, it's going to call attention to itself and flatten out. So there, I just kind of gave it a little bit more form. Not quite exactly what we're seeing in there, but I think it's close enough. There's this dark spot around it that I need to lighten up. I'm going to use my kneaded eraser to kind of tap that up. All right. Wilma doesn't need to. Yes, thank you for commenting about the details here about Wilma. You know, about suggesting detail versus not. And again, hopefully, what it becomes apparent in this process of building the whole drawing up is that we make multiple stabs. Each time we make another pass through the drawing, we can add more detail and more refinement. So I could stick with this for another 2-3 hours, really dialing in that detail. Or I could stop, and I think anybody could look at this and say, oh, that's a couple apples there. We understand the light structure, we understand the composition. This is too strong back in here. But that's kind of the beauty and the advantage of the idea that we build it up as a whole. Because detail in itself isn't, you know, it may be your objective as an artist, but it's not going to be the objective for everybody. And for me, generally, it isn't. Structure and light are more important to me. That ultimately becomes more important, I think, in my oil paintings as well. Detail, it tends to be more superfluous. And in some ways, it can detract from the form. If detail becomes too strong and the form isn't there, then it ultimately doesn't tell the truth of the subject. And if we're here for some sort of truth, then something just to be mindful of. And again, you want to connect with your way of working and what's comfortable for you. Like I said, I get claustrophobic when I get too kind of refined in these tiny details. All right, let's see. I think I'm going to darken this area right in here as well. Create a little bit of contrast. And I'm doing this because I still haven't gotten to the highlights yet, but I want to get the rest of the value relationships kind of dialed in before I do. Looking for some of those hatch marks, trying to eliminate them. So right here, if I want to work on that background, I'm just going to go right over that stem. I'm going to have to draw that again now, rather than try to be too precious with it. I think it's easier to do that and kind of erase out that stem again than try to be precious with it and try to draw in around it, if that makes sense. Now I just gave it a little bend, which is kind of cool. So if you're drawing along, I'm really looking forward to seeing what you all post on Artist Network. All right, now I think we're generally, I think we've got a decent structure of light and shadow. I'm going to kind of pull out some of the lights here. This is a way I would normally think of in painting using a brush. One of the nice things about this kneaded eraser is that you can kind of shape it however you want. All right, so now let's go for more value contrast. I want to create that sense of light and shadow. Kind of erase back in here where that light is catching. We come around into here. I don't really like that shape. I can take that back out. I didn't really shape the kneaded eraser very well. But you can see how easily it was to fix that. So if I didn't like that highlight, it's essentially gone right there. I'm gonna build it up kind of multiple passes. And this may not work for you, as an artist, but that's why we're here drawing together, is that we get to share our own experience, what works for us. And now we've got the highlight right in here. So using pressure, just like I do with the graphite, is, again, the eraser isn't just a tool for correction. It's an opportunity to refine the form. And it uses the same principles of pressure, shape, form, value. You can kind of feather things off a little bit. Right under here, I think I need to sharpen this edge. And it builds up a layer of graphite there that it was just kind of smudging on there, so I just need to move to a new section of the kneaded eraser. And if I've got the form right, then the texture and those details should all fall in place. Like our mind should start filling in those gaps. Silver lining, is this a realism art class? Yeah, typically this is really designed to help improve observational skills, observational drawing, because the objective here is for me to, we're practicing drawing so that then I can apply that to other mediums as well. When I'm on location painting, for example, then I can apply what I'm learning from this to help improve my hand-eye coordination, the perspective, proportions, all of that. And so, as such, it's about kind of capturing the overall realism of the scene. Not necessarily a classical approach, but there are kind of classical ideals that we're incorporating into this. The idea of sight measuring, comparative measuring, angle sighting, things like that, value structure, all of what you see in classical realism. But I've never really studied with in a classical setting. All right, so now, if you've been watching, I've drawn this part of the background how many times now? I keep making multiple passes, but that's part of the process, right? It's like we're gradually refining and bringing everything up. But I think I'm kind of drawn to this area. It's kind of in the center, and I think it's really important to help establish those the spatial relationships there. So now I'm just really kind of looking for areas that are kind of distracting. If there are any kind of blotchy areas that need to be smoothed out. I think the overall proportions are pretty solid, maybe not 100%, but good enough for me, I think. So, and hopefully this has been helpful for you all, again, to think about, using graphite perhaps in a different way. I'm not quite sure exactly where you're all coming from, but based on my experience, there's a tendency to use graphite in such a way that we kind of create an outline and then fill it in. This is very much more in line with how I think about drawing in charcoal, and I want to show you how that can be applied, that same type of thinking. All right. Maddie, unfortunately, I don't do a whole lot of watercolors, but you can check out my oil paintings. Scott Maier art.com, so M-A-I-E-R. So scottmaierart.com is some of my oil paintings. Instagram is probably the best place. That's where I post things more frequently because I'm really bad at updating my website. Check out artistnetwork.com though. We have a lot of additional drawing resources there. There's links in the description below to the Drawing Together page from which you can link to the individual show pages. So we have a whole list of there, each based on the subject. So you can kind of, if you're just joining us now, if you've never seen us, then you can kind of join in, kind of jump into the series wherever you want. The cup was the very first one we did, if you're looking to start the series from all over again. But yeah, I guess I'm not really doing a whole lot new here. I'm just kind of going through and refining. I'm going to hang out for a little bit more to see if there's any additional questions, but I think we've got it all covered. Join me again on Wednesday. We're going to be working on a waterfall from a reference photo I'd taken last year up outside of Breckenridge here. I'm in Colorado. So I'm excited about that one. And I haven't decided what medium I'm going to be using. Now that I've been practicing with the graphite to utilize it as, similarly to charcoal, perhaps I'll do graphite again. But we will see. Yeah, Tammy, you're asking, it is a woodless graphite pencil. It's a General's pencil that I'm utilizing. And I'm not sure exactly why I chose this. I think it's just because it was there. I think typically I think I would utilize an ebony pencil I really enjoy. And that would get very similar results. So if you're joining a little bit late, at the beginning of the video, if you were to watch it again, I kind of show the materials and show how I sharpen a pencil if you don't have a woodless one here. But I'm really enjoying the value that I'm able to get out of this. One of the challenges that it can be with graphite is that it can kind of catch the light and have a hard time displaying on camera, but it seems to be working all right. When I'm looking at some of these areas, I'm just seeing a shine that I have to kind of move around to see the actual value, or look at the screen in front of me that seems to be doing an all right job of capturing it. I think right in this area, I'm feeling like it flattens out a little bit, so I want to add a little bit more form. Just something for the mind to catch on. How do I protect it? That's a good question. I do not do a great job protecting my artwork. This is really just for me. I don't, I'm not intending to show this or anything like that. But you can, you could provide put a layer of spray fixative over this, but that can sometimes distort the contrast in your work. So a sheet of like a Mylar film, I think, would be helpful. On Instagram, you can find me at Scott L. Maier, so scott.l.maier. That's my Instagram feed there. How do you remove eraser crumbs without smudges? I'm typically kind of blowing them. The earlier stages you saw that I was just kind of wiping that down. That helps to get rid of some of those eraser crumbs. At this stage, though, I would just simply kind of blow it. They do make brushes. You might, if like for picture framing, you can buy like really soft brushes that might work well, but you would probably want to use that for other graphite drawings and not mix mediums there, because it's going to pick up some graphite particles as well. Yes, the little metal triangle sharpeners. Yeah, so let me show you what, I do have an electric pencil sharpener, but these little guys right here work just great. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll save these pencil filings just to have some powdered graphite to work with, but I haven't been doing that, and now I have a bag that I catch all the kind of junk from sharpening the pencil, and it's got all the wood shavings in there as well, so I can't really use it as powdered graphite. Krisha asking how long we take for this. So this is, I've been on about an hour and a half, and I think we're just about done. So I'm just kind of picking away at this. Just want to answer any questions that you've got. But again, I'm not sure if I'm going to be giving a whole lot more instruction on this. Join me again, 3 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday I look forward to seeing you. Share this with others. If there's anybody else that you know that you want to draw along, it'd be cool to get a group of you together when it's safe. Virtually, I imagine, getting together. But a makeup brush, Rosalie, that's a good one. I use, makeup brush actually works really well for oil painting. Just kind of soften some ridges. On Wednesday, it's going to be a mountain stream, kind of like a waterfall. It's a spot, one of my favorite spots outside of Breckenridge here in Colorado. And it was from last summer when we went up there, and there was a cool old mine, and then there was this river that's kind of towering down. So I'm going to have fun trying to capture the energy of that one. Greg, if you're watching, I'm still looking for an architectural source. I think I've narrowed things down a little bit, but in the next couple of weeks, I promise to do some sort of structure, some sort of building. So, oh, colored pencils. Let's see. Yeah, I've had a few questions about colored pencil, and if any of you have suggestions on how to apply this thinking to colored pencils, I think it would be beneficial to the group here. I don't work a lot with them. I do have pastels that I work with occasionally, but so thank you all. I think we're probably pretty good for now. I appreciate it. I'm pretty happy with the way this turned out. It's a lot of fun. So I look forward to seeing all of your attempts and your finished drawings. What I really like actually is, like some of you have been posting your work and you're sharing a bit of your experience. So when you go to Artist Network and you're sharing your drawings, kind of say, hey, I'm really happy with this one, or I struggled with this, or I'm going to give this another shot, or maybe it's something that's not quite finished, but we see a whole variety of kind of results, and it's really awesome to see that. Some of them work out great, some of them don't, but everything is, every drawing is an opportunity to improve. So, what is the title of this? So, yeah, this is this series is Drawing Together. Again, I'm with Artist Network, so we have a website, artistnetwork.com, and yeah, that's the series. We're working on developing some additional series, try to get some more painting going on here. So hopefully in the next few months we'll have some new artists to bring your way as well. So, all right, I think we're good to go for now. Erase this out. I appreciate it. Yes, thank you. I see. Guy, how do we find you? So go to artistnetwork.com and learn more about the resources there. If you want to look up more of my work, I think Instagram is probably the best. Go to scott.l.maier, Maier, and I have my website, scottmaierfineart.com as well. You can see a bit more, but Anita, I'm glad you like the titles. That is so much fun coming up with the titles. It gets more and more challenging each episode, though. So I'm glad my dorkiness works, at least for some of you there. All right. So thank you all. There's a question about a reminder. You can sign on YouTube, you can sign up, or if you're a subscriber, should get notifications, and there should be a little bell symbol there that will help to send notifications. But I think it's about that that event. So make sure you subscribe, and then you'll get notifications, and you'll see each upcoming event. So again, we meet every Monday, Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. All right, Barbara, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I did too. Time to sign off. Thank you. See you all on Wednesday.